Good afternoon. I have three good pieces of information for you. I'm the last speaker. I don't have a PowerPoint, and we no longer have a retirement crisis in the United States. So let me jump into it. I want to thank Olivia and the Pension Research Council for offering me the opportunity to read and discuss these two papers. I appreciate your confidence, knowing that I'm neither an actuary nor an economist. So assignments like this are good for one's soul. They take you out of your comfort zone, and it's an opportunity for self-education and reflection on one's own beliefs. Let me start with John's paper. John and his colleagues from the IMF compare pension and insurance regulations across 16 countries, both developed and developing, to determine if pension longevity risk is given more lenient treatment. The authors compare and contrast institutional roles and objectives of pension funds and insurance companies. And I think this is very important because in the future, we may see much more integration between pension funds and insurance companies buying and selling benefit liabilities and swapping other specific risks like longevity. Patterns of this behavior were already mentioned by John in his paper, most notably General Motors, Verizon, and quite recently Canada Bell. The author's conclusions are uncertain. They determine that the subject is in regulatory flux, citing the imminent implementation of Solvency II in 2016 that could greatly affect these insurance companies, as well as the sheer lack of information that was very difficult for the authors. They note that half the countries surveyed do not require specific mortality tables or discount rates for pension funds or insurance companies. And they also reveal that the regulatory regime is very different from country to country, with only France, Germany, and the Netherlands having regulators that cover both sectors. Finally, the authors suggest some qualitative factors that may influence regulators. The fact that policymakers may treat pension funds differently because they do not want to discourage occupational pension sponsorship. I'm actually a big proponent of this novel idea that governments and regulators should promote an occupational pension tier. Unfortunately, we often observe breakdowns between regulation on the one hand and social and political goals of providing sustainable retirement delivery systems. For me, it's not an issue about favoring pension funds over the insurance sector in terms of regulation. I'm more interested in promoting the broader goals of effective retirement delivery, affordability, and security. One key issue not addressed by this paper is the fact that insurance is typically a profit-seeking endeavor. Isn't that a huge distinguishing economic difference between insurance and pension funds? Regulating profit motive behavior requires a different set of financial safeguards to protect consumers. Practically speaking, isn't this reason enough to regulate insurance companies differently than pension funds? We seem to have forgotten the lessons of executive life and mutual benefits, or more recently, the annuity selling scandals in the UK. Governments and related stakeholders like pension funds should have a special interest in the prudential regulation of insurance companies, especially if pension funds plan on utilizing insurance products as a better way to manage certain pension-related risks. The topics raised by the authors are hugely important to pension practitioners and policymakers. Longevity risk is a hot topic of discussion at every pension board that I sit on. The SOA 2014 tables are actually front and center agenda items. Pension boards take the setting of pension assumptions quite seriously, but every plan has a different industry experience and should be given some discretion in how it changes and transitions its mortality assumptions. I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all decision. In my opinion, it would be arbitrary and bad public policy to mandate mortality tables to pension plans. Regulations for pension funds and insurance companies should not be promulgated in a vacuum, ignoring changing economic realities and regimes. Who could have predicted the great financial crisis and its aftershocks? Quantitative easing, negative interest rates that are now embedded in trillions of dollars of government debt securities. In this new financial world, how do we define risk-free, safe assets? Has the economic term risk-free become an oxymoron? How do regulators maintain and support the integrity of pension funds and insurance companies in such a radical environment without threatening the financial integrity of the very institutions? These questions suggest seed for future research projects. Consider the OECD International Network of Pension Regulators and Supervisors principles for private occupational pensions. Principle number 1 reads, an adequate regulatory framework for private pensions should be enforced in a comprehensive, dynamic, and flexible way, taking into account the complexity of the schemes in order to ensure the protection of pension plan beneficiaries, the soundness of pension funds, and the stability of the economy as a whole. This framework should, however, not provide excessive burden on pension markets, institutions, or employers, end quote. I'll make one last comment about the topic of pension regulation. Kiff et al. Point out that the process of regulation is organized differently in each country surveyed. I posit to you that the structure of regulation is a predictor of success of the end user, whether it's a pension fund, a pension system, or an insurance industry. The more decentralized and fragmented the regulatory authority, the worse the result. The U.S. is the poster child for my hypothesis. 50 state insurance commissioners, 50 state pension laws, ERISA, the IRS, the U.S. Treasury, the Department of Labor, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and multiple congressional committee jurisdictions create an environment of overregulation, uncoordinated public policy, misplaced priorities, and regulatory competition, fostering unintended results on pension stakeholders. Last week, Paul Volcker issued a radical call to consolidate financial regulation in the United States, following the lead of the UK. I believe Mr. Volcker's ideas should also be applied to the U.S. pension regulatory system, both public and private. Our second paper by Andrew Biggs takes on the critical retirement foundation subject of retirement replacement rates and how they're calculated. He recommends 3 major methodological adjustments to the traditional approach to calculating replacement rates. First, he suggests policymakers replace stylized hypothetical earnings patterns with available administrative data in micro-simulation models. Second, he advocates pre-retirement earnings be adjusted for the growth of prices versus the traditional use of wage indexation. And third, he proposes the replacement rates incorporate a family size adjustment to account for the effect of children on parents' needs to save for retirement. The author then simulates his 3 adjustments to replacement income using a model developed by the Policy Simulation Group, which is also utilized by, not awful, maybe it is awful, I'm not sure, it's also utilized by Social Security Administration, Department of Labor, and GAO. The results miraculously show that actual replacement rates for Americans are substantially higher than we understood. On this basis, he challenges research from the Center of Retirement Research and others who have determined that more than half of the Americans are at risk to reduced standards of living in retirement. This is fantastic. Change a few formulas, run a model, and a serious societal problem disappears. According to the author, the question the Americans' retirement security is not so much how much, but how much is enough. Not surprisingly, I'm a bit troubled by the author's conclusions. It's not because I relish a good crisis. I mean, my entire career has been a crisis, having a front row seat for 37 years watching the decline of the American labor movement and the demise of defined benefit plans, which just happens to coincide with the secular decline in real average wages for Americans and the historic regeneration of income inequality in this country. But lest I become distracted, back to the subject at hand. We know there's some subjectivity involved in the concept of replacement income. Replacement income standards don't meet the needs of every worker. There's just too much diversity in work experience. A 70% replacement income rate doesn't meet the needs of a low-wage career worker. Preparing impoverished workers for impoverished retirement does not exactly seem like a worthy societal goal. This gets to the author's how much is enough question. In the case I just mentioned, if your working life was spent on the edge of near poverty, is our goal to maintain that pathetic standard of living in retirement? I hope not. That surely doesn't reflect on Social Security's accomplishments in actually reducing the poverty rate for retirees by half. I also believe that the author makes too much of the Social Security Trustees report removing the replacement income tables in 2014. The Office of the Chief Actuary continues to publish updated replacement income rates, which are the basis of all benefit calculations and financial projections. On the issue of replacing wage-indexed average earnings with CPI-indexed average earnings, I believe there may be a disconnect with the foundations of what the Social Security system was meant for. Allow me to quote one of the fathers of the Social Security system, Robert Ball. Quote, "The original understanding of Social Security was defined by the nature of the institution borrowed from abroad. Insurance against wage loss, compulsory, contributory, independently financed, without a test of need, and with eligibility and benefits based on past earnings." Note the stated principles of protecting wage loss based on past earnings. Social insurance was conceived as wage insurance. Breaking the link with the average national wage index by using the CPI index is inconsistent with the benefit provisions and the intent of the Social Security Act. No other OECD social insurance system has moved away from wage indexation that I know of. In addition, the Office of the Chief Actuary wrote in an actuarial note number 155 in July of 2014 that the CPI index approach is also inconsistent with the intent that replacement rates should be based on late career or final pay, which fully reflects increased standard of living in the economy over a worker's career. My impression is that the Chief Actuary's Office has not been complacent about various methodological challenges to the replacement income calculations. Last year, in testimony to Congress, the Chief Actuary indicated that the SSA had tested its replacement income calculations using 200,000 new beneficiaries versus its hypothetical scaled workers. The administrative data sample matched up closely with the scaled workers. In addition, SSA also introduced the concept of basing replacement income on the last 6 years of non-zero earnings. This approach produced a replacement rate, again, very close to the median scaled worker based on career average indexed earnings. A similar approach was suggested by our author using last 5 years, including zero wage years, but was rejected by SSA as being flawed because 15% of new beneficiaries had no earnings at all in the last 5 years, and 25% of all last years had at least 1 zero in them. The other change suggested by the author recommends adjusting replacement rates for household size and composition. He assumes, based on limited and highly speculative research, that consumption drops when children leave the household and savings rise automatically. Therefore, additional replacement income is not necessary. When the author quotes Jonathan Skinner's peanut butter analogy, suggesting that because one may eat peanut butter during child-rearing years, one could be prepared to eat peanut butter for the life and through retirement, I stared at the paper in disbelief. Is this the fate of all parents, to accept lower consumption in old age? Is this economic man behaving optimally? Does common sense ever get factored into these theories? Where's the empirical evidence that families consume less after the children exit and at the same time ramp up savings? More grist for future research. Despite the author's efforts, I'm afraid we're on the cusp of a serious retirement crisis in the US. Pang and Warshawski wrote an important paper last year on retirement savings adequacy using a life cycle model and computing the actual wealth of households in the survey of consumer finances. They concluded that 44% of workers in 2010 are saving inadequately if they plan on retiring at normal age with full Social Security benefits. That number rises to 51% if workers plan to retire earlier. Moreover, the savings inadequacy worsened by 4 to 5% of households compared to 2007. The authors cite asset losses in the Great Financial Crisis and the decline of defined benefit coverage as significant explanatory factors. That's an economic reality I can understand and fear. The question I have to our group today is, what actions can we take to change that dynamic? Thank you.